You should not have come. Mave stood behind the half-open door, staring at Alara as if this moment had been waiting for them both. Her hair was grayer than Alara remembered, her face thinner, but what unsettled Alara was not how much Mave had changed. It was what had not appeared in her eyes. Surprise. Mave looked past her toward Kale, standing several feet behind her, then back at the woman she had raised. Mave, Alara whispered. The older woman tightened her hand around the door. Please, go back to Blackstone. Alara's breath caught. She had not mentioned Blackstone. She had not explained why they were there. Yet somehow Mave already knew. Earlier that morning, Rowan had placed a single sheet of paper on the table in Kale's private study. Your Majesty, Mave does not want to be found. The address near the bottom had been filed only 3 months earlier. Alara recognized the county immediately. She had lived less than 20 miles from there as a child. Mave had packed her lunches, braided her hair before school, and sat beside her through winter fevers. Mave had also disappeared before Alara learned that the Moon Court had identified her as the last living member of the witness line. Now the woman who had raised her was living close to a place Alara had once called home. Kale had not reached for the address. He had looked at Alara instead. Do you want to find her? Not should they go. Not what would the council permit. Her choice. Yes, Alara had answered. By early afternoon, Blackstone had disappeared behind them, replaced by narrow roads, bare hills, and scattered farmhouses beneath a silver winter sky. Rowan drove ahead with one guard while Kale and Alara followed in a second vehicle. Kale asked no questions during the trip. Alara already carried too many of her own. Why had Mave never mentioned Dr. Hart? Why had she hidden Alara's bloodline? And why had she moved only months before the truth began surfacing? The address led them to a small cedar house at the end of a gravel road. Smoke rose steadily from the chimney. A stack of split firewood stood beside the porch, and an old blue pickup rested beneath a bare maple tree. Everything about the place looked ordinary. That made Alara more uneasy. She had spent years believing Mave's ordinary life was exactly what it appeared to be. Standing on the porch now, Alara understood that finding her had never been the difficult part. The difficult part was deciding how much of her childhood had been real. How did you know I came from Blackstone? Alara asked. Mave went still. Kale said nothing. He did not step forward or use his title. He simply waited behind Alara, leaving the question where it belonged. Between the two women. Mave? Alara asked again. The older woman closed her eyes for one brief second. Because I knew this day might come. What day? Mave opened her eyes. For the first time, Alara saw something stronger than reluctance in them. Fear. The day the moon found you. A cold breeze moved across the porch, carrying the scent of pine and wood smoke. Alara remembered that scent from childhood mornings when Mave would wake before sunrise and warm the kitchen before school. The memory should have comforted her. Instead, it made the silence between them ache. You knew about the moon? Alara asked. Mave's expression tightened. I knew enough. Enough to leave without telling me. Mave looked away. Behind her, the house was warm, but Alara noticed a suitcase near the stairs and 2 cardboard boxes beside the kitchen wall. Mave was preparing to disappear again. Were you expecting someone? Alara asked. Mave followed her gaze toward the luggage. I was hoping I would not have to. Alara felt Kale move a little closer, still careful not to take the moment from her. She steadied herself. I did not come here as the Alpha King's wife. I came because you raised me. If there is something about my life you have been carrying all these years, I deserve to know why. Mave looked at her for a long moment. The resistance in her face did not disappear, but something softer moved beneath it. Grief, perhaps, or guilt. Finally, she released the door and stepped back. Come inside, she said quietly. Then her eyes moved to Kale. All of you. Alara crossed the threshold first. She had come looking for the woman who had raised her. But, as Mave closed the door behind them, Alara could not escape the feeling that she had just entered the first room of a past someone had spent 19 years trying to keep locked. Mave closed the door and stood with her hand on the lock for a moment longer than necessary. Alara noticed. She noticed everything now. The curtains drawn across the front windows. The coat already folded over the suitcase. The 2 cardboard boxes near the kitchen, one sealed and one still open. This was not the home of a woman settling into a quiet life. It was the home of someone prepared to leave quickly. You were going somewhere, Alara said. Mave turned from the door. I was considering it. Because of me? Because circumstances changed. Alara almost smiled at the familiar answer. Mave had used phrases like that throughout her childhood whenever she wanted to end a conversation without lying outright. You still do that? Mave frowned. Do what? Answer the question beside the one I asked. For an instant, something almost maternal softened Mave's face. Then it vanished. Kale remained near the entrance while Rowan moved only far enough inside to close the distance from the cold. No one treated the small house like territory belonging to the crown. Alara was grateful for that. She walked toward the kitchen and stopped beside the table. The room smelled of cedar, coffee, and lavender soap. That scent carried her backward without permission. Rainy afternoons. Mave humming while washing dishes. Homework spread across a table much like this one. A childhood that had felt ordinary because Mave had worked so hard to make it seem that way. I found your guardianship record, Alara said. Mave's eyes sharpened. Where? That matters more than what was in it. Sometimes where a record survives tells you who wanted it preserved. Rowan glanced at Kale, but neither interrupted. Alara continued. Dr. Samuel Hart signed the transfer. Your name appears as my guardian. There are gaps before that. A lot of them. Mave looked toward the coffee pot. Would anyone like coffee? Alara stared at her. Mave. The older woman closed her eyes briefly. No. Of course not. Did you? No, Dr. Hart. Yes. The answer came too quickly to hide. Alara felt her pulse change. Then why did you never mention him? Because there was no reason to. There is one now. Mave said nothing. Alara drew a slow breath. Last night, the Moon Court recognized me. Mave's fingers tightened against the back of a kitchen chair. So it finally happened. Silence fell instantly. Kale's expression sharpened. Rowan stopped beside the counter. Alara felt something cold move through her. How much did you know about what the Moon Court would reveal? Mave seemed to realize she had said too much. Not enough. You knew enough to expect this day. I knew there was a possibility. A possibility of what? Mave looked away. Alara stepped closer, not angry enough to raise her voice and too hurt to need to. Mave's shoulders lowered. Alara, there are things you do not understand yet. Then help me understand them. It is not that simple. It has never been simple for me. I just did not know why. That landed. Mave looked at her, and Alara saw the woman who had once sat beside her after a school dance because no one had asked her to go, telling her that being overlooked did not make her less worthy of being seen. Alara had believed every word. She wanted to believe Mave now. Did you know about the witness line? She asked. Mave did not answer. She did not need to. Her silence changed the room. Alara felt years of memories shift at once. Family history forms left blank. School projects Mave discouraged. Questions about relatives redirected toward happier subjects. You knew, Alara whispered. Mave finally met her eyes. I knew enough to be afraid of the day you found out. Afraid for yourself? Mave shook her head. Never for myself. Alara's voice softened. Then for whom? Mave looked at her as though the answer should have been obvious all along. For you. Afraid for me because of what? Alara asked. Mave's gaze drifted toward the curtained window, as though 19 years of caution had trained her to check the world outside before answering anything dangerous. Some truths change the moment other people know you possess them, she said. That is not an answer. It is the safest one I can give you. Alara felt the old instinct to stop pushing. As a child, she had learned to recognize the quiet finality in Mave's voice, the tone that meant a subject was closed. But Alara was no longer a child sitting at a kitchen table waiting for an adult to decide what she was ready to hear. I have spent most of my life paying for a truth no one allowed me to know, she said. Mave flinched. Rowan opened the leather folder he had carried inside. Dr. Samuel Hart signed a guardianship transfer 19 years ago. Your name appears as the receiving guardian. Mave looked at him. Then you already know what the record says. We know what survived, Rowan replied. That is not necessarily the same thing. Something like reluctant respect crossed Mave's face. Alara rested her fingertips against the edge of the table. Did Dr. Hart bring me to you? He helped arrange it. Why? Mave hesitated. Because you needed somewhere safe. Safe from whom? I cannot answer that. Alara swallowed her frustration. Cannot, or will not. Both. The honesty surprised her. Did it have something to do with the witness line? Mave lowered her gaze. Yes. One word, and another piece of Alara's childhood changed shape. She remembered being 10 years old when her class had been assigned a family tree project. Mave had suggested she make hers about the people who had influenced her instead. At 13, Alara had asked why they had no old family photographs. Mave had told her that some families carried their history in stories rather than albums. Alara had thought those answers were gentle ways of protecting an orphan from feeling different. Now she wondered whether every kindness had carried a second purpose. "Who were my parents?" she asked. Mave's face changed. Not surprise. Grief. Alara saw it immediately. "You knew them." Mave turned toward the window. "Mave, do not ask me about your mother." The words were so quiet Alara almost missed them. Her chest tightened. "Why?" "Because I cannot give you everything you want. You do not know who she was." "That is not what I said." Kale shifted slightly behind Alara. But he did not intervene. She was grateful. This question belonged to the girl she had once been, the one who had spent birthdays wondering whether somewhere in the world another woman remembered the date. "You knew my mother," Alara said. Mave closed her eyes. "Yes." The room seemed to lose its air. Alara had imagined learning about her mother in 100 ways since the Moon Court revealed her connection to the witness line. She had never imagined the answer would come here, beside a coffee pot and a bowl of apples, from the woman who had raised her. Was she part of the witness line? Mave said nothing. "Did she leave me with you?" Still nothing. Alara's voice dropped. "Did she want me?" Mave turned so quickly that the chair beside her shifted against the floor. Never believed that. The certainty stopped Alara cold. Mave pressed her lips together as if she had already crossed a line she had promised never to approach. Alara's eyes burned, but she refused to look away. "Then tell me what happened." "I cannot." "Why?" Mave stared at her for a long moment. When she spoke again, the guarded woman at the door seemed to disappear, leaving only someone who had carried a promise longer than Alara had carried the questions. "Because 19 years ago, I gave your mother my word." Alara barely breathed. Mave's voice softened. "She asked me to keep you beyond the reach of people who might recognize what you were before you were old enough to choose what it meant." Alara's fingers tightened against the table. "And where did she go?" Mave's eyes filled with a sadness that answered more than her words did. "That is one promise I am still not free to break." Alara stood perfectly still. Then Mave added, almost in a whisper, "But protecting you was the last thing she ever asked of me." For several seconds, Alara could hear only the steady ticking of the kitchen clock. "Protecting you was the last thing she ever asked of me." The words should have brought comfort. Instead, they opened another door inside her, one crowded with questions she had carried since childhood without knowing their names. "Protect me from whom?" she asked. Mave looked toward the window. "I cannot answer that." Alara drew a slow breath. Anger would have been easier. Anger had edges. This felt like trying to hold water in her hands. "Then tell me what you can." Mave's shoulders lowered slightly, as though that request had reached a place accusation could not. "I can tell you that your childhood was not as ordinary as I wanted you to believe." Alara thought of all the towns they had lived in. Small houses, short leases, schools where she rarely stayed longer than 2 years. Mave had always called each move a fresh start. "We moved because of me." Mave nodded. "Sometimes." "How many times?" "Enough that I stopped unpacking certain boxes." Alara remembered one of them. A brown carton Mave always kept taped shut. She had assumed it contained tax papers or old clothes. Now, even that harmless memory felt different. "You were hiding me. I was keeping you difficult to trace." That sounds like the same thing. To a child, perhaps it was. Alara remembered a 4th-grade project requiring family records. Mave had kept her home that day, claiming she had a fever. Another year, a community heritage ceremony invited families to register their ancestry. Mave suddenly decided they were visiting friends 3 counties away. There had been doctors they never visited twice, photographs Mave refused to submit to local directories, and forms where entire sections were left blank. Tiny moments. Harmless moments. Until now. "You were keeping me out of records," Alara said. Mave did not deny it. "I was keeping your name from traveling farther than it needed to." "Did you change my name?" "Never the name you knew yourself by, but sometimes paperwork needed to be less precise." Rowan glanced up from his folder. "That would explain why the Northern Genealogical Registry has almost nothing from her early childhood." Mave's expression hardened. That was the point. Alara looked at the woman who had taught her to write her name carefully on the first page of every school notebook. The contradiction hurt in a way she had not expected. "You taught me that my name mattered." "It did. But you made sure no one could follow it." Because I wanted it to belong to you. Before it belonged to anyone else. Alara went still. Mave's voice softened. Hart believed that if the wrong people connected you to the witness line, they would stop seeing a child. They would see evidence. Kale's gaze sharpened, but he remained silent. Did Hart tell you who those people were? Alara asked. No. He told me only what I needed to know. And you accepted that? At first, because I trusted him. Later, because I had you to protect. Alara felt years of memories rearranging themselves. Mave packing boxes after dark. Mave checking the street before opening curtains. Mave teaching her never to tell strangers where they had lived before. Alara had believed she was being raised by an unusually cautious woman. She had been raised inside a shield she could not see. My whole childhood was built around a secret. No, Mave's answer came immediately. Your childhood was built around keeping you safe. There is a difference. Not to the child who was never told. Mave lowered her eyes. You are right. The admission hurt more than an argument would have. Alara swallowed. Did you ever plan to tell me? Mave took too long to answer. I hoped there would come a day when telling you would no longer put anything at risk. But that day never came. I did not know if it had. Alara glanced toward the suitcase near the stairs. Suddenly, its meaning changed. That is why you were leaving again. Mave followed her gaze. Old habits are difficult to lose. No, this is not habit. Alara stepped toward the suitcase. You learned the Moon Court recognized me, and you started packing. Mave said nothing. Alara turned back. You still think someone might be looking for me? Mave's face went pale. That was answer enough. Alara felt Kale move closer behind her, not touching her, simply there. She kept her eyes on Mave. Who? Mave whispered. I do not know anymore. Then she looked toward the curtained window. And that is what frightens me most. Mave's last words remained between them, heavier than the winter silence outside. Alara wanted to ask another question, but Rowan spoke first. Your Majesty, may I have a word? Kale glanced at Alara before. Following Rowan several feet away, near the front window. They kept their voices low, but the house was small, and Alara could hear enough to understand. Mave can be required to appear before the Northern Council, Rowan said. If she has information concerning the witness line and the succession records, the council can compel testimony. Kale's expression did not change. Can they? Under the old statutes, yes. Especially now that the Moon Court has confirmed Alara's lineage. Alara looked at Mave. The older woman had heard every word. Her fingers tightened around the chair, and suddenly Alara saw not a keeper of secrets, but the woman who had spent years watching doors, changing addresses, and sleeping lightly whenever an unfamiliar car remained too long outside their home. Kale turned toward Rowan. No, Rowan paused. Your Majesty? There will be no order. The council may argue that this concerns the crown. Then they can argue with me. His voice remained calm. There was no threat in it, only decision. Rowan closed the folder. Understood. Mave studied Kale with open surprise. You could make me answer. Perhaps. Kale stepped back toward Alara. But I will not. Mave frowned. You came all this way for the truth. I came because Alara wanted to come. He looked at his wife, not at Mave. There is a difference. Something tightened in Alara's throat. For most of her life, other people had decided which answers she could carry, where she could live, what records could contain her name, and when she was ready to know her own history. Kale had more power than anyone in the room, yet he was the only one refusing to use it to choose for her. If Alara has spent 19 years having choices made for her, he continued, I will not uncover her past by taking another choice away. Mave's gaze dropped. Alara remembered the first weeks at Blackstone, when she had mistaken Kale's restraint for distance. She understood it differently now. He could stand beside her without standing in front of her. He could protect without turning protection into control. Alara faced Mave. I am not asking him to force you. Mave looked up. But I am asking you to. Look at me and understand what your silence costs now. I know what it costs. No, Alara said softly. You know what it cost you. I am the one who grew up inside the secret. Mave's face tightened for only an instant before she recovered. I thought not knowing would give you an ordinary life. It gave me a life I loved, Alara said. Those are not the same thing. The distinction seemed to reach Mave more deeply than anger could have. She slowly sat down. What do you want from me? Alara considered the question. Yesterday, she might have said everything. Now she understood that answers could arrive in pieces without becoming less meaningful. Tell me what you are free to tell me. she said. And when you cannot answer, tell me why. Mave stared at her for a long moment. Then her eyes shifted to Kale. And if the truth about her threatens your throne? Kale answered without hesitation. Then I would rather know what is true than rule comfortably beside a lie. Mave went very still. Something in her expression changed. Not surrender. Decision. She looked at Alara again, and this time the fear in her eyes seemed to make room for trust. Dr. Hart once asked me what kind of man would stand beside you when this day came, she said. Alara's breath caught. He knew about Kale? Not Kale. Not his name. He only believed there might come a day when your past and someone else's power would meet in the same room. Mave rose before Alara could ask more. She walked toward the narrow hallway and stopped beside the stairs. Wait here. A moment later, a floorboard creaked overhead. Then came the faint sound of something being moved. When Mave returned, she was carrying a small wooden box against her chest. Alara recognized it immediately. She had seen that box throughout her childhood, always somewhere just beyond her reach. Mave placed it on the table and rested both hands on the lid. I have kept this for 19 years, she said. Her gaze settled on Alara. And Dr. Hart told me never to give it to you unless the moon found you first. Mave kept both hands on the wooden box, as if releasing it required more courage than carrying it through all those years. Alara remembered seeing it on high shelves, inside closets, once beneath a stack of winter blankets when they were moving from one house to another. She had asked about it when she was 9. Mave had called it a box of old papers and distracted her with hot chocolate. Who told you to wait for the moon? Alara asked. Dr. Hart. Mave finally lifted her hands from the lid. He believed the moon court was the only confirmation that could not be rewritten, misplaced, or buried inside another record. Rowan exchanged a quiet glance with Kale. Alara touched the box, but did not open it. You carried this through every move. Every one. Even when you thought no one was looking for me anymore? Mave's expression softened. Especially then. Feeling safe can make people careless. Alara ran her fingertips along a shallow scratch in the wood. She remembered making that mark accidentally while playing near Mave's closet as a child. The box had been part of her life long before she knew it belonged to her story. Kale stood beside her, close enough that she could feel the steadiness of his presence without him reaching for her. Mave noticed again. Her gaze settled on him. May I ask you something before she opens it? Kale nodded. If what is inside threatens your throne, what happens to her? Alara turned toward him. Kale did not need time to consider his answer. Nothing happens to her because of my throne. Mave watched him carefully. That is not what I asked. Then ask the question you mean. Mave drew a slow breath. If knowing who she is costs you power, will you still want the truth known? Kale's eyes remained steady. If my throne requires a lie, then the lie is the threat. The room fell silent. Alara felt those words settle somewhere deep inside her. Kale had spent his life carrying obligations she could barely imagine, yet he had answered without protecting himself first. Mave seemed to hear the same thing. Some final resistance left her shoulders. Dr. Hart worried about power more than he worried about any one person, she said. He used to say good people could become dangerous when institutions taught them that preserving order mattered more than preserving truth. Rowan frowned. Did he believe Blackstone's succession records had been altered? Mave shook her head. That is beyond what he told me. I promised Alara I would distinguish what I know from what I fear. Alara looked at her, surprised. Mave gave the smallest nod. It was not an apology, but it was a beginning. Open it, she said. Alara lifted the lid. Inside lay a faded photograph wrapped in soft cloth, a small silver token marked with the same crescent symbol she had seen in the moon court records, and an old brass key no longer than 3 inches. Beneath them was a folded piece of paper. For a moment, Alara simply stared. These objects had crossed county lines with her. They had slept in closets while she slept in nearby rooms. Mave had protected them before Alara was old enough to understand why they mattered. She reached for the photograph first. It showed Mave standing outside a building Alara did not recognize. Beside her was Dr. Hart, younger than in the archive photographs. A third figure stood partly turned away from the camera, one hand resting near the collar of a pale coat. Something about the posture stirred an ache Alara could not explain. Her breath caught. Is that my mother? Mave looked down. I cannot answer that yet. Pain flashed through Alara, but she remembered what she had asked of Mave. Tell me what you can, and tell me when you cannot. Before she could speak, Kale pointed gently toward the photograph. There is writing on the back. Alara turned it over. For words appeared in faded blue ink, written in the same hand she had seen in Hart's surviving records. When she remembers, return. Her fingers tightened around the photograph. Return where? Mave looked at the brass key inside the box. Home. Alara glanced around the cedar house, confused. This was my home. Mave's eyes filled with a sadness Alara could not yet understand. Not this one. Alara looked again at the photograph, then at the small brass key resting inside the box. What home? She asked. Mave pulled out a chair and sat slowly, as though the next words had waited years to become heavy. The first place you lived after. You left the medical annex. Alara frowned. I do not remember an annex. I know. Mave's answer came softly. Rowan stepped closer to the table. Was it connected to Blackstone? Not directly. It belonged to a private medical foundation about 40 miles north of here. Dr. Hart worked there before most of its records were transferred. And I was there? Alara asked. Mave nodded. For a short time. A strange pressure gathered behind Alara's ribs. She searched her memory and found nothing complete, only scattered images that had never belonged anywhere. Yellow curtains, rain against glass, a narrow hallway, and the faint smell of something clean and medicinal. How old was I? Young enough that Dr. Hart hoped time would soften what you remembered. Kale's gaze sharpened. What did she remember? Mave folded her hands. I was called to the annex late one evening. Hart told me a child needed somewhere quiet to stay with a guardian whose name had no connection to the royal houses. When I arrived, Alara was sitting in a hallway with a blanket around her shoulders. Alara stared at her. Was my mother there? Pain crossed Mave's face. Not when I arrived. Did Dr. Hart tell you where she was? No. Then what did he tell you? Mave looked toward the box. He told me your name must stay out of the Northern Genealogical Registry. He said there were questions surrounding old bloodlines and succession records. He believed that if anyone connected you to the witness line before the proper time, you could become part of a dispute you were too young to understand. Rowan spoke carefully. Did he identify anyone who might use her that way? No. That is the truth. Alara picked up the silver token. It was cool against her palm. You said Hart expected me to remember. Mave's expression changed. You kept repeating something that night. What? Mave hesitated. You said the moon was inside the room. Alara's fingers went still. For an instant, something flashed through her mind. Silver light beneath a closed door. A strip of white across a dark floor. Someone whispering her name from somewhere she could not see. Then it vanished so quickly she could not tell whether it was memory or imagination. Kale noticed her face. Alara, I am fine. She took a breath and looked back at Mave. What room? I never saw it. Dr. Hart would not take me there. Mave pointed toward the brass key. But before we left, he gave me that. What does it open? A room in the house where you stayed afterward. Alara frowned. After the annex? Yes. Hart arranged a house where we could disappear for a while. It was quiet, isolated, and registered under a name that had nothing to do with either of us. And there was a locked room. Upstairs, at the end of the hall. Alara felt another faint pull somewhere behind her memory. Not an image this time. A feeling. Standing at the bottom of stairs and knowing she was not supposed to climb them. Did I ever ask about it? Mave looked at her carefully. At first, constantly. Then less often. Eventually, not at all. Why? I do not know. Mave's honesty made the answer more unsettling. You stopped speaking about the annex too. Hart said not to force you to remember. He believed memory sometimes returned when a person finally felt safe enough to face it. Alara looked down at the key. The house still exists. Yes. How do you know? Mave paused. Because I checked. Alara looked up. When? 6 months ago. Why would you go back after all this time? Mave's eyes moved to the photograph in Alara's hand. Because old records connected to the Moon Court had begun resurfacing. I did not know whether that meant anything for you, but I wanted to know the house was still there if the day ever came. Alara felt the pieces drawing closer together. Mave had not simply waited. She had been watching for signs. And this message means I am supposed to return there. Only when you remember. Alara closed her fingers around the key. What if I never do? Mave was quiet for a moment. Then perhaps Hart wanted the choice to remain yours. Alara stared at the ordinary brass key in her palm. For most of her life, the blank spaces in her childhood had felt empty. Now they felt like a door. And somewhere behind that door, something had been waiting for her to come back. Alara kept staring at the brass key until the edges left a faint impression against her palm. A house she barely remembered. A locked room she had once asked about constantly. A message written by Dr. Hart telling her to return only when memory found its way back. Every answer seemed to uncover another question, but one had been waiting beneath all the others since she entered Mave's house. Alara placed the key beside the photograph. Was I ever just a responsibility to you? Maeve's face changed immediately. Alara, please. Her voice remained quiet. You made a promise to my mother. Dr. Hart trusted you to hide me. You changed addresses, kept me out of records, and carried that box everywhere we went. I need to know whether you stayed because you had to. Maeve lowered herself into the chair across from her. For a moment, she looked older than Alara remembered, not because of the gray in her hair, but because of everything she had carried without speaking. At first, Maeve said, I stayed because I gave my word. The answer hurt, even though Alara had asked for honesty. Maeve continued before she could look away. Then you woke me at 3 in the morning because you were convinced there was a bird trapped outside your window. You cried on your first day of school, then told everyone you had something in your eye. You refused to eat carrots for almost 2 years because you decided orange food could not be trusted. A fragile smile touched Maeve's face. You once spent $4 of your birthday money buying food for a stray cat that refused to come within 10 feet of you. You sat on the sidewalk for an hour anyway. Alara remembered the cat. Gray, suspicious, missing half an ear. She had named him Henry despite never learning whether he belonged to anyone. You remember that? I remember all of it. Maeve's smile faded into something more tender. Somewhere between those ordinary days, the promise stopped being the reason I stayed. Alara felt her throat tighten. Then why did you never tell me? Because loving you did not make me brave. Maeve's eyes filled, but she did not turn away. It made me more afraid of losing you. Kale remained silent beside the table. Rowan had moved toward the window, giving them what privacy the small room allowed. Maeve folded her hands. Every year that passed made the truth harder to explain. When you were 10, I told myself you were too young. At 14, I told myself you deserved a few more peaceful years. When you became an adult, I convinced myself the danger had probably disappeared. Then more time passed, and silence became easier than admitting I had waited too long. So you kept choosing for me. Yes. There was no excuse in Maeve's answer. I thought protection gave me that right. It did not. Alara looked down at the silver token. She wanted forgiveness to arrive cleanly, like opening a curtain and letting sunlight into a dark room. It did not. Love and anger could apparently occupy the same heart without canceling each other. I understand why you were afraid, she said. I am not ready to say what you did was right. Maeve nodded slowly. You should not say it until you believe it. That answer loosened something inside Alara. Not enough to erase the silence between them. Enough to breathe. Maeve reached across the table but stopped before touching her hand, leaving the final inch between them for Alara to decide. Alara looked at those familiar fingers, remembering scraped knees, packed lunches, birthday cakes that leaned sideways, and countless nights when Maeve had left the hallway light on because Alara disliked waking in darkness. She placed her hand over Maeve's. Maeve closed her eyes. No one spoke for several seconds. Then Alara asked, why did Dr. Hart believe I would remember someday? Maeve opened her eyes. Because before you stopped talking about that night, you drew the same place over and over. What place? Maeve withdrew her hand and walked to one of the cardboard boxes near the stairs. From beneath several folders, she removed a thin envelope and carried it back to the table. Inside was a child's drawing in faded crayon. A small house, a silver moon, and one upstairs window colored completely white. Alara stared at it. Her pulse quickened. The crooked roof meant nothing. The trees meant nothing. But that window did. She knew it. She did not understand how, but somewhere inside her, she knew that window. Maeve watched recognition move across her face. That, she whispered, is the house the key opens. Alara kept staring at the child's drawing until the crooked lines seemed less like crayon and more like memory. The roof sloped sharply on one side. 3 narrow windows faced the front. The upstairs window glowed white beneath an oversized silver moon. She had drawn it with the certainty children gave to things they could not explain. Where is this house? She asked. Maeve sat across from her, her hand still resting near the wooden box. About 30 miles north of here, outside a town called Ashford. Dr. Hart arranged for us to stay there after I took you from the medical annex. Alara looked up. How long? 11 months. The answer startled her. 11 months should have left memories. Birthdays, seasons, meals, rooms. Yet when Alara searched for them, she found only fragments without names. Rain against glass. Yellow curtains. A staircase turning left. Moonlight beneath a door. Why did we leave? Mave hesitated, then honored the promise she had made earlier. I know what happened, but I do not know why. Dr. Hart came one morning and told me it was time. We moved before sunset. Rowan glanced toward the drawing. And the locked room. It was already locked when we arrived. Hart told me never to open it. You never tried? Kale asked. No. Mave looked at Alara. The key was never meant for me. Alara picked up the brass key again. It felt impossibly ordinary for something that had followed her through most of her life. Is the house still there? Yes. I checked 6 months ago. Alara's eyes narrowed. You actually went inside? No. I drove past it twice. The property looked maintained, and the house appeared empty. Who owns it? Rowan asked. Mave shook her head. I do not know. Dr. Hart handled everything when we stayed there. I never saw a lease, and I never asked questions he had already warned me could create records. Rowan made a small note in his folder. I can verify the current ownership before anyone enters. Alara appreciated the practicality of that sentence. It made the house feel less like a legend and more like a real place waiting at the end of a road. Why did you check on it after all this time? She asked. Mave gave a tired smile. Because old promises do not stop maturing simply because no one asks about them. The winter light outside had begun to fade, turning the kitchen windows gray. Kale moved beside Alara. We do not have to go today. She knew what he was really saying. She did not have to prove courage by moving faster than she was ready to move. I know. We can return to Blackstone. You can decide tomorrow, next week, or never. Mave nodded. Hart left the choice with you for a reason. Alara looked at the drawing again. For most of her life, other people had described the missing pieces of her past as emptiness. Now one of those pieces had a roof, a staircase, and a white upstairs window. She was afraid of what waited there. But fear no longer felt like an order to turn away. I want to go tomorrow morning, she said. Kale simply nodded. No argument. No relief. Just acceptance. Mave reached for a sheet of paper and wrote down the address. When she slid it across the table, Alara stared at the road name. Ashwood Lane. Something shifted inside her before she consciously understood why. Her breath caught. The kitchen disappeared for one brief heartbeat. She was small again, her palm pressed against cold glass. Rain traced silver lines down a window. Somewhere behind her, a clock chimed. Dr. Hart was kneeling beside her, not frightened, not hurried, simply watching her with an expression she had never understood. His voice returned as a fragment, softened by years. Remember the moon, little one. Alara went still. Kale noticed immediately. Alara. She blinked, and Mave's kitchen returned around her. I remembered something. Mave's face lost its color. What? Alara closed her eyes, searching for the rest, but only another fragment surfaced. A white window. A closed door. Dr. Hart's hand pointing upward. Then his voice again, faint but unmistakable. It will show you what they tried to hide. Alara opened her eyes. Rowan had stopped writing. Mave stared at her as though a clock set 19 years ago had finally begun moving again. That is why he waited, Mave whispered. Alara looked down at the key. She did not suddenly understand her childhood. She did not know who had hidden the truth, what the locked room contained, or why Hart had trusted memory more than records. But for the first time, the next step belonged entirely to her. She slipped the drawing back into its envelope and stood. Tomorrow, I am going to Ashwood Lane. Kale met her eyes. Do you want me with you? Alara answered without hesitation. Yes. Then she looked once more at the white window she had drawn as a child. Somewhere behind it waited the memory Dr. Hart had trusted time to preserve. Alara closed her fingers around the key. Tomorrow, she would return to the house she had forgotten. And this time, no one else would decide which door she was allowed to open.